sure you've all heard about Jack Teixeira, the Air Guardsman who was arrested recently regarding the leak of documents related to the ongoing war in Ukraine. This man was arrested. It looked more like a military invasion than some sort of arrest of somebody who I would say is doing the right thing. The media response, by and large, particularly the mainstream media, has been quite disappointing to say the least. They actually assisted in tracking him down. The New York Times seemed to have tracked him down even before the FBI identified who he was and was able to locate him. The Washington Post was in possession of hundreds of pages of leaked documents, more than what was publicly available or available to other news outlets. But despite that fact, they chose to focus their first story not on any of the information in those documents, but just on this whistleblower from a very negative perspective. There's reasons to be negative on this guy, racist memes, Discord groups, things he's saying. But frankly, how much does any of that matter? I don't think that really matters that much at all in terms of how the media is responding to it. The reality is that what Teixeira exposed was a host of just outright lies of great consequence that have been fed to the American public. We found out that, in fact, the United States does have troops on the ground in Ukraine. We found out that there are plans for Zelensky to use U.S. weapons to strike deep into the heart of Russia, which we also were told would not be the case. And all of this has largely been kind of glossed over by mainstream media. Another thing was that the Pentagon's first briefing on the matter, the media questions almost entirely centered on how horrible it is that this leak happened. How are you going to prevent future leaks? This sort of thing, with minimal questions about the documents themselves and the lies that have been fed to the American public. But what I did want to talk about in more detail that I think people are not nearly as aware of is the FBI's history in doing this sort of thing and cracking down on whistleblowers and other people who basically challenge power, and notably the animal rights movement, which has been targeted for decades by the FBI. The animal rights movement has at times been deemed the nation's top domestic terrorist threat. Not Al-Qaeda, not white supremacists, but the animal rights movement. Do we have a ticker here of how many, what's the count up to for how many people the animal rights movement has ever killed? I mean, we're talking about domestic terrorists. I don't know, like a thousand, few thousand, a few hundred, zero. The answer is zero. What has been deemed the nation's top domestic terrorist threat, at times, not currently, has never killed a single person. So, dang, if we are domestic terrorists as animal rights activists, we are apparently not very good ones. And this domestic terrorism label has been a pretext by which the FBI has surveilled, infiltrated, and harassed peaceful animal rights activists for decades. And there are a few instances that really strike close to home to me personally and my involvement with Direct Action Everywhere. Notably, in 2020, I was approached by a truck driver with Iowa Select Farms because of what was happening, the animal abuse that he was seeing. No one around him was taking action on. Long story short, his information led to me documenting this practice called ventilation shutdown. Absolutely nightmarish stuff. Thousands of pigs are crammed into these industrial sheds. The windows and the doors are sealed up. Heat and steam are pumped in, and these animals are just screaming for hours on end, and they're killed. Now, when we released our findings, the government officials were quick to take action, not against the animal cruelty, the obvious unconscionable animal cruelty, but against those who exposed it. I was arrested at dawn within 24 hours the following day after our findings were released, and I was prosecuted, a felony prosecution that lingered on for 2 years with years in prison hanging over my head. But that maybe wasn't even the worst of it. The FBI got involved. They went and contacted this whistleblower, unbeknownst to me, and they came to him and they were asking him if he would be willing to sell drugs, if he would be willing to wear a hidden recording device, wear a wire for them. And they made this request of him with the not so subtle implication that perhaps there might be some negative consequences for him if he didn't cooperate. They would neither confirm nor deny if he was under investigation for any possible charges. So here you have this guy who is married and has a baby on the way at the time, and he's really put in a difficult spot. And to be very clear, the FBI is asking him if he's willing to do these things, not because they suddenly just saw some potential in him that he's really got the right stuff to be Iowa's next top FBI agent. The reason that they approached him was because he was a close personal friend of mine. We became close throughout this process, and he's someone who in their eyes, could potentially come and talk to me and gain my trust and could entrap me into some sort of wrongdoing, which would then be used to demonize me and prosecute me and, completely undermine the horrible animal abuse that I had documented with his assistants. Now, thankfully, he had the courage to call their bluff, and he didn't. He declined their offer and didn't cooperate with them. So that was great to see, but obviously, just a really messed up situation. Another example, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this investigation that the DXE conducted of the largest pig farm in the country. Smithfield Foods is Circle 4 Farms in Milford, Utah, investigated and exposed some really horrific animal cruelty there as well, removed 2 dying piglets from the facility. And then, in addition to those folks also facing a felony prosecution, the FBI raided farm animal sanctuaries in Utah and in Colorado. So we have these 2 piglets that were sick, that were of no commercial value, would have been either killed or would have died on their own and been trash. And now here's the federal government. The FBI is engaged in a nationwide pig hunt to try to track down, this supposed stolen property. And so you look at this situation, clearly the dollars and cents don't add up here. This is done for the purposes of intimidation. There are countless examples that I could go into of this whole dynamic here, and where the FBI is targeting us and the media. I guess in our case, the media wasn't so fervently criticizing us and targeting us the way that it is with Teixeira, but the media was basically silent. Now, you have a few Glenn Greenwald, people who are not so much part of the kind of corporate media, juggernauts, but by and large, the media just completely ignored our findings like nothing really happened. And so this is kind of the long history of the FBI protecting corporate interests over the interests of ordinary people.